Namaste students. Today we are here for another session of English. Today we have decided to go for a poem by John Keats. And the name of the poem is A Thing of Beauty. John Keats, he's a romantic poet. Like other sessions, I'm going to repeat the same thing, that it's very important to know the life of the poet. Because if you know the background of the poet, the interpretation inside the poet, the tension inside the poet, that has actually caused such kind of production. So if you can have the color of the poet, you can make your understanding, or you can make the poem colorful. Definitely it's true. Suppose if you're painting something, if you can catch the color, the impression of the color, then only the painting becomes colorful. From that perspective, it's very important to know the age and the poet, because the poet behaves according to the age. Right now you are behaving according to the demand of the age. Mobile is important at this stage, so therefore you cannot stay, you cannot go back 10 years. It's very difficult to stay. So you are behaving according to the age, according to the expectation of the age. So Keats, he belongs to Romantic period. Romantic period begins in 1798 with a publication of lyrical ballads. It's written by Wordsworth. And it ended officially in the year 1832, which saw the death of Walter Scott, another novelist. But it's literature. It cannot be changed like this. It's going to be very appalling if you change. Because you have to understand, suppose if we talk about in terms of medicine, we say that 3rd November, this medicine gets over, the expiry date gets over. So does it mean after 12 of 2nd May it gets over? Definitely it's not. But after all, it's the time period. If we use that medicine during that particular time, it's going to be very, very useful. That's the motto, that's the message. So this is Romantic period. Romantic period is actually a product after Classicism. According to me, Classicism and Romanticism, they are not contradictory, but they are complementary. Now we have to understand what is Classicism and what is Romanticism. Each and every movement has its own inspiration from the other. Similarly, there is, suppose if you talk about experience, experience is actually a product of the earlier action that you had done. Similarly, things in Classicism have paved the emergence of Romanticism. So they are not contradictory but complementary to each other. That is what we have to understand. Sometimes we have the notion, and the notion is completely mistaken, that Romanticism is charging against Classicism. There is a clash. Clash is there. We have to discuss this point because it's essential to get into the poem. Broadly, Romanticism is actually a reaction against form and convention of 18th century. To be very specific, it is a rebellion against classical restraint, intellectual disciplines, and other formations of the society that you have to maintain meticulously. The decorum of 18th century has created a standard that how to think, how to write, and how to express. Subsequently, what happens? Rules, formulas, policies, conventions, these become much more important than literature. So you have to understand that literature is not a product of a policy. You have to maintain certain policies, but at the same time, you have to unleash your expression, your imagination. You have to make it free, because imagination matters much the moment you are flying into a world of dreams. Because actually you have to leave the real world so that you can reach to a world which is a creative world. It's much more important. But Classicism has not given that much space so that you can remove your expression, chains of expressions. So subsequently, rules and formulas, they became very, very important. Rather, they became a restraint and obligation for imagination. But you have to understand one thing, that Romanticism did not revolt against all these conventions, formulas and policies. Just I said that policies you need. You have to maintain certain decorum, certain points. Then only you can create something. Let's take an example. Suppose you are writing a formal letter or informal letter. You have to maintain how to write an informal letter. But in between, in the body of the letter, you can be free. Whatever things you want to share with that particular person, you are free. But while you are writing a letter, there is a grammatical construction under which you have to write the letter. So what I'm trying to say, or what I'm trying to mean, is that definitely you have to follow certain rules and ideas before you compose anything. So Romanticism did not revolt against everything that Classicism has created or established. Simply because an artist, anybody, if I'm very specific about this, an artist is not purely classicist, neither classicist nor romantic. For an example, Wordsworth is not purely romantic or unromantic. Pope is not purely classicist or unromantic. You have to think this. There is a mixture. A human body is a mixture of good and bad, divine and beastly qualities, animal qualities. But which quality becomes prominent in you, that matters a lot. So in Romanticism, Romanticists, they have stressed on imagination, on emotion, feelings, ideas. So they have unleashed all the shackles. Novelists said that imagination is key to creation. Another critic said that emotion is at the throne of human creation. So therefore, it is a clear-cut instruction to all the romanticists, or rather to romantics, that if you create something, you have to unleash, you have to be free from the shackles of all these conventions. What do? Actually, these conventions, they create a pressure and they try to rule over you. An artist becomes diminished, cramped by this. You cannot express what you are actually trying to say or trying to compose, trying to vent out. Ultimately, rules become prominent, not the piece, not the subject matter, not your imagination. So romantics, they wanted to be free from that shackle. So therefore, as imagination or feeling differ person to person, romantics are also different. And everybody is different. So rather, romanticism becomes an expression of your personality. Rather, there is a word individuation. What kind of individual you are, accordingly you are giving an expression. So it's kind of freedom of your imagination. Free flow of imagination. They have romanticism has unbolted all the imagination and emotions. So your heart becomes a fountain of imagination and it becomes an exploration. Romanticism becomes an exploration of your ideas, where there is no obligation. There is no inconvenience. It can flow according to its movement, according to its direction. So Classicism, the last point that I'm trying to share with you, Classicism focused at something which is universal. Something which is universal, united, complete idea. But Romanticism, it takes sources from different aspects. It may be Gothic, it may be medieval, it may be supernatural, it may be sentimental, everything. Even it doesn't decide a place also. For an example, classicists, they have an idea that the moment you have to maintain a decorum all the time, the moment you are writing something, you have to sit on your study table. And that study table should be decorated with books. It should be scattered with books. But romantics, they differ in that particular idea that even though you are sitting in a drawing room, you are drinking coffee. At that point of time, if any idea visits you, you can compose. So ultimately, it also talks about that you are free from all the shackles, from all the conventions. Whatever you are, accordingly, you are giving expression to your thoughts, to your ideas. And ultimately, you are giving shape to that. That's the kind of essential difference between classicism and romanticism. We need to catch this essence before we go into Keats. So this is a very scrap of the introduction of romanticism. At the same time, the quintessential, substantial difference between these two movements, major movements in English literature. Next, I need to talk about a little bit about Keats, because if you understand the life of Keats, then it becomes very easy what the idea, what's the devotion, what's the motto what's the principle that he has followed throughout his life. Because he has believed in one idea, that is beauty and truth. So there is no separation between truth and beauty. According to him, there is truth, there is beauty. But before we go into that intricate concept, complicated concept, let's try to have an understanding about the poet. Keats was born in the year 1795. You can understand that he is the youngest member of the Romantics. And I told that officially Romanticism began in the year 1798. So before officially it was declared that it's the age of Romanticism, Keats just has taken his birth. So Keats has seen what is Romanticism, because he was standing on the threshold when Romanticism entered. So Romanticism is going to be very much exponential for Keats. He had a very small span of life, unfortunately. And it's a strange thing, all the Romantics except Wordsworth, they had a very small span of life. What's the reason? Maybe it's a mystery. Nobody knows. Wordsworth only lived up to 80 years. Other all Romantics, Saint, Byron, Shelley, Coleridge, they had a very short life. But it's really strange. Another queer thing, that within that short period of time, the production, the creativity that they had shown to this world, everybody should be awestruck. So that's a different aspect. So Keats was born in 1795. He has lost both the parents at a very tender age. It's a very shocking incident. And after the death, he was very close to his brother. But unfortunately, the death of his brother is another addition to his shock and melancholy. So you can understand that he has seen deaths, and perhaps that matured his life. This is just like Rabindranath Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore throughout his life has seen the deaths of 13 people, very close. So therefore, Rabindranath Tagore has written in one of his texts that perhaps these deaths have concretized his sense of living in this world. So it's another shock for Keats. And Keats was a student of medicine. But his mind was with the medicine, but his heart was very much attached to literature. With the help of Leigh Hunt, he came to literature and he flourished himself. And in the year 1821, in Rome, he had his last breath. So he had a life of only 25 years, very young. And he is the youngest member of the Romantics. But within these 25 years, the world that he has shown, the world he has created through his creation, this is unprecedented, unparalleled world. Keats, like any romantic poets, Keats has shown the nature of poetry and poetry on nature. His letters are important documents which reflect his theory of poetry. In one text he has mentioned that we hate poetry that hath a palpable design upon us. Wonderful saying. We hate poetry that hath a palpable design upon us. That's a claim, that's a saying by Keats. What does he mean by this? He tries to mean that we distrust poetry where it tries to represent author's perspective or the poet's perspective and ideas very clearly. So that kind of poetry we have no faith. So what he suggests to say is that poetry should be indirect and it has to be read through the interpretation of symbols and images without any interference of the poet. That's the theory of Keats. So there will not be any interference of the poet. If poet comes there to illustrate, to explain, the span, the version of the poem gets minimized. You are cramping it. It becomes deflated. So inflation comes if there is no interference of the poet. That's the claim. One of the prominent themes of John Keats is the conflict between everyday life and eternal world, eternal truth. When he talks about everyday life, he tries to mean the life of pangs, suffering, decay, dilapidation, death and doom, despair. This is the life. On the other side, he wants to talk about ideal truth, endless happiness, everlasting truth of poetry, free flow of imagination. These are all permanent things. So there is always a conflict and clash between these two different domains, these two different horizons. His first collection, Endymion, in the year 1818, where he was very much influenced by Greek myths and legends. And in that particular anthology, he has talked about the same clash. To catch the eternal beauty and truth within human limitation. There is always a limitation. Everything you do, problems will come. You have to overcome the problem to reach to that ultimate status of your life. Otherwise, it's very difficult. But those who can cross, those who can infringe the problems, they only become successful in this world. Maybe in academics, maybe in different fields of life. It's true. Next, A Fall of Hyperion. It's quite ambiguous because it has created so many confusions and conflicts in the society. However, he has talked about a clash between old gods and new gods, because new gods are marked by their strength and beauty. Again, the theory of beauty comes in. And think about the stamina and the power and the confidence of the poet, that he could think that old God, not only human beings, even old God, if they cannot illuminate the world with their beauty and the strength and the power, there is a chance of dethronement. They can be dethroned and somebody can be enthroned. That's the concept that he has produced. Even though it's very much ambiguous, it creates conflict in the society. Rather, it becomes a contamination to those religious people. But after all, in those kind of poems, he has, especially in that particular poem, he has shown his individuality as a poet. He tries to find out his own individual talent. Next, Keats goes on writing long poems. In those long narratives, he has again characterized his talent. And at that point of time, the prominent romantic themes became very, very dominant. Themes like I have just shared, that it may be exotic, it may be supernatural, it depends on folklore, myth, legends, medieval society. So these become the common theme, just like other romantics. Next point that I want to talk about, that Oats. Keats is very famous for his Oats. Rather, he is considered to be one of the masters of Oats. In his Odes, very complicated, it is considered to be one of the complicated poetic kind of writing addictions, where the richness of sensitivity of human life is contrasted with the transience of human life. At this point of time, oxymorons become his theme. For an example, he gets melancholy in delight, pleasure in pain, excitement in depression. You can understand that Keats is such a genius who can deal with contradictory subjects, and much with authenticity, excellence. he has presented those ideas with exuberance that creates a wonder in the minds of the readers. Keats is one poet who has experienced love and death with equal intensity. And he understood that pain is very important to get the pleasure of any creativity. And it's true. You need to undergo that pangs, and that makes you perfect in the process. Just like APJ Abdul Kalam, where he says that if you want to be a sun, bright like the sun, you have to burn like the sun. You have to bear that pain before you become a sun. It's true. Pain actually creates that. From shok, the word comes shloka. So if you want to compose shloka, you have to get that shok. And last, very important and prominent feature of John Keats is that he has talked about senses. He is a sensuous poet. And that particular quality is called synesthesia. It is actually a selection of images and language choices which describe sensory impressions in terms of other. So it is actually depends on your perceptions, sensory perceptions. So he talks about smell in terms of other. For an example, when he talks about sunburnt mouth, it's a happiness. Sun, you have to feel the touch, at the same time it's a visual thing. Burnt mouth, and at the same time it's a very, very sensitive appeal to the body. So within one image, he can include all other impressions, say it visual, olfactory, auditory, gustatory, and tactile. So Keats has mastered in this. So synesthesia, it's a concept, perceptual concept. You have to be very much perceptible to understand that sense. So this is all about Keats, because Keats is again a prolific poet in the history of English literature. I have tried within this small span to catch bits of Keats. So keeping those minds in relation, we will try to read the poem that is prescribed in a syllabus, A Thing of Beauty. Thank you very much. If you have any problem, please jot down those problems. Whenever we have any connection, face-to-face communication or conversation, we will try to deal those problems. Thank you very much.